This looks like any other regular beautiful lake in the world, but it's not. It's actually one of the rarest lakes in the world, and technically it should not exist. Lake Fundudzi, located in northern Limpopo, South Africa, formed by a landslide and protected by ancient spirits, is one that requires people to not actually look at the lake directly. You have to turn around and bend over to look at this lake. I came to Lake Fundudzi to get a closer look at this sacredness. I used to come here as a kid and I'd picnic here, but I had no idea what I was looking at. And bringing this project together, I got to speak to the village chief senior councillor, Bavenda, Alfred Buderi, and other incredible people like Simpson Mugwabana, who have lived around this lake for years to get a better understanding of this mysterious lake. I also dove deep into the research that is out there, to try and get a better understanding of the scientific explanations behind this mysteriousness. Also bear in mind, there's a lot of limited research on this lake because it's so sacred. The other side is a growing community and space where we get to discuss topics such as history, politics, and culture, and of course, share the other side to these topics. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, join the other side, a growing community who gets to discuss and debate. And if you haven't already been to Lake Fundudzi, let me know if you'd want to visit this mysterious sacred lake. And if you have, share your comments and your thoughts in the comment section. I'd like to know. In this video, I'll be covering 4 massive mysteries of this lake. And the 4th one will honestly shock you. Let's begin with Mystery 1. Mystery 1. How did Lake Fundudzi randomly appear here one day? According to the indigenous community here, Lake Fundudzi was formed by the gods as an expression of their favor to the people living around the lake. Recent scientific research has emerged and shows that Lake Fundudzi formed 5,000 to 10,000 years ago in a rare landslide. Think of it like this. The Soutpansberg Mountains, located in northern Limpopo, are bordered by the Mutare River. Think of the Soutpansberg Mountains as a table made out of rock, a very hard rock known as quartzitic sandstone. Over time, in the legs of this table, cracks began to emerge. And through these cracks, rainwater began to flow through them. And because of this rainwater, it began to weaken the legs of this table, began to create vulnerabilities in this table. Until one day, what happened is that they were so weak that they eventually fell over. The leg of this table fell over. And as it fell over, rocks began to fill in, and also the water from the Mutare River fell in and formed Lake Fundudzi. What makes this lake so mysterious is that this type of landslide is so rare, and that normally the lakes that are formed in such a manner normally last a couple of months at best, maybe sometimes a year. But this one has lasted for an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 years. Think about that. This in itself is very rare and, of course, has caused a lot of sacredness. Where do you land with this? Do you agree with the indigenous community that this lake is God-sent? Or more so, it was a rare landslide that occurred and has been here for 5,000 to 10,000 years? Also bear in mind that the research is limited on this lake. Let me know your thoughts on the comment section. Lake Fundudzi is known as the lake where the waters never ever really mix. And it's a lake filled with 2 different bodies of water. And firstly, with the water from what is now known as Lake Fundudzi, and the water that flows through it from the Mutare River in Limpopo. This point will be important for later.
Ili Fundudzi ndisha line la mangadza ngori alidali nga milambo ngoruna milambo ine yapira khalo dova limwe na limwe. Fundudzi eli lidala musi mvula ichina, lidadzwa nga maḓi a mvula ndio lichidala. Hezwi mvula yo ima lia dova laha la dia hune la suka la guma hone mvula ichina futhi la dova la dala. Milambo iko difira dova la limwe ndo bona vukati ane falo ishaheli mutale wo bvanga vukati. Uchawene wava hone ya hone nga fasi ya Fundudzi uko dibudza upfi mutale ngori uko fira kha ili isha Fundudzi Fundudzi ali mutale uko ubvanga fa hona fasi ya ne Fundudzi ali tuweli hezi mvula ichina liko dara hezi mvula yono ima isikhana chipeta chimwe chilafu liaha la dala guma ene fone la guma hone hezwi mvula i tshi dovha i tshina ḽa dovha ḽa ḓala ḽa guma henefho ḽa guma hone kugumele kwa hone a ku fani hu tea ngori mvula yona hani kha muṅwe ḽi a ḓalesa nga maanḓa kha ḽiṅwe ḽi ḓo ḓala ha swika na muthe milambo ya ḓala ya kule ngo swika na muḓini ya vhathu.
The indigenous people here believe that the reason why the water doesn't actually mix is because the waters of Lake Fundudzi were bestowed by the gods and that they can't possibly mix because the water is pure and filled with divinity. But research shows that the reason why water doesn't mix is kind of similar to the Dead Sea. It's due to different factors, multiple factors, such as temperature, salt concentrations, and the chemical composition of water, the flow patterns, amongst many other things. The lake borders among 7 villages in the area: Chiaba, Chitangan, Chieni, Charota, Chirungui, Pongoni, Chidzibe. This lake is very vast, full of so much biodiversity, so many different types of birds, so many different types of bugs, even the soil composition, even the soil, when you look at the soil, it is so different. Even the plants look so different and unique. And there's so much different biodiversity in terms of fish in the lake. You will hear people across the lake speaking as sound carries over from one side to the other. The depth of the lake is estimated to be 60 to 90 meters deep. However, many people are not actually certain about this. Once somebody tried to actually do deep water diving in this lake, however, they did not survive due to just how deep this lake is. This rock that you see here is very big, yet it rests on a ridge.
Tine chamangadza hezwi mvula i tshina milambo ya ḓala ya kumba na matombo a tshi ṱuḓa henengene wo Fundudzi, mara hafha vhukati ha Fundudzi na musi ri tshi bambela a huna tombo na ḽithihi a ri ḓivhi zwori a khou fhelela gai ha matombo. Ahuna ono zwi ḓivha ngori na musi u tshi bambela a u swiki fhasi haḽo, u tshi bambela a u swiki fhasi haḽo. Ya hezwi u tshi bambela a u swiki fhasi, u khou ḓi ita tshiṅwi wa guma henefho wa guma wa dovha wa bva. Vha ya fhasi vhane vha ita tshiṅwi mara vha swiki fhasi vha swika vha ri ro guma fhasi hafha Fundudzi ri khou bambela, vha khou ḓi ita tshiṅwi vha dovha vha bva.
Many have tried to estimate the depth of this lake, but have failed. Oftentimes, young boys are tossed into the lake. This is their first swimming lessons and allowing them to get their first taste of divinity and the sacredness of this lake.
Le Fundudzi kale musi ri kha ḓi vha vhaṱhanga ra tshi ṱwa ri tshi tamba hone henefha, ro ri tshi bambela hone, ri tshi kona u bva ḓuvha ri tshi ya Vhukovhela kana ra bva Tshipembe ri tshi ya Galanga nga hanefho hune ra tala ngaho. Ra tshi bambela nga maanḓa hafha kha Fundudzi heḽi musi ri tshi ya vhaṱhanga ra tshi ṱwa henefho, ndo ra tshi ṱwa henefho Fundudzi tshi bva tshikoloni ra ḓa Fundudzi ri tshi lisa hone dzikholomo hafha Fundudzi musi ri kha ḓi vha vhaṱuku.
The waters of Lake Fundudzi are only increased by rain, and sometimes when it floods, it actually expands 1 to 5 kilometers beyond the point I was at this day. And if you look here, you'll actually see the differences between the plant lengths. If you look above, you can see the plants are a lot longer, and down here, they're actually a lot shorter. That sort of shows when it last flooded, how high it had risen by, and also just how much time it's also had to take to grow back. Mystery 2. Why do you need to bend over and view Lake Fundudzi from between your legs? And also, why do so many weird things happen around this lake? So, Lake Fundudzi is such a majestic and beautiful lake. It's honestly, when I was there, I sort of felt this energy that was humming beneath the surface. It was so beautiful, so many beautiful plants, so many things that I got to experience when I was in that place, and you could feel the divinity. And as I was coming to this lake, I actually got to speak to one of the villagers there, and he told me this story where a group of people from a different community came to this lake to do rituals here. They drove down in their 4x4 truck/bakkie and began doing rituals in the water of this lake without the appropriate consent. This happened during the dry season, so there wasn't much mud in this area. When they tried to leave, their big 4x4 got stuck in the marshes and they were unable to leave. They asked this villager for assistance to try and get them out. This villager tried to use his own 4x4 to try and get these people out, but he wasn't successful. The villager invited other members of the community to try and help him get these people out. They dug around the tires to try and also improve the situation, but it didn't work. And eventually, this villager asked, "What are you actually carrying in your car?" And the people confessed that, hey, you know what? We actually took water from Lake Fundudzi to try and perform our rituals when we got home further. This villager was in disbelief. He could not believe that they actually took water from the sacred Lake Fundudzi, and he advised these people and said, "You need to put this water back, otherwise the spirits around here will not let you leave." It eventually got so dark as they were trying to help these people leave the lake that the villagers had to actually turn back and go home to their own families. And when they left that group of people there, still trying to get their 4x4 out of the mud. Lake Fundudzi is a lake with such great mystery that people reported also hearing drums late into the night, also known as zingoma, and also heard people doing chikona. Chikona is a very sacred special dance that is performed during very special occasions.
Roswika na ngoma ni dza vhadzimu fhedzi ro wana dzo no dzhena maḓini a ri ngo dzi vhona nga zwavhuḓi ngori Fundudzi ḽo ḓala. Hedzi ngoma dza vhadzimu kale dzo vha dzi tshi lila ri tshi dzi pfha musi ri tshe vhaṱuku. Hedzi ngoma dza dzi tshi lila musi hu tshi lila tshikona hetshi tsha Tshiavha tsha vhaṱavhatsindi vha Tshiavha. Musi ri angei kule kule mashangoni kana vho Tshiavha vho Tshieni wo gai zwa tshi pfale dziṅwe musi dzi tshi khou lila tsha kale kale musi shango ḽi kha ḓivha ḽo lala.
And when they would try and figure out where these people came from, they wouldn't know where these people came from or where the drums actually came from. That in itself is a big mystery. As I mentioned earlier, Lake Fundudzi is known as the lake where the waters do not mix. I asked the villager what those people over there are doing, and the villager told me that the people over there, they're doing rituals, and that they're unable to use Lake Fundudzi because of the spirits that lie within Lake Fundudzi. So the little section that you see over there is where the Mutare River flows through, and it is where they are able to still fulfill their spiritual mandate, however, without interacting with Lake Fundudzi directly. So the waters never mix. So the rituals that they are doing over there in the Mutare section get to flow over to the end of the lake and never actually penetrate the Fundudzi River. It is speculated that the Mutare River gets its name from the fact that Lake Fundudzi and Mutare never ever actually mix, and the word Mutare, it translates into demarcating, and it demarcates the section between the lake and the river. There are a lot of strange things happening around Lake Fundudzi. Has anything strange like this happened to you? Let me know in the comment section. And I have another mysterious situation that also happened around Lake Fundudzi. Another strange mystery that I was told by a villager happened in Chiwisa, a section of the lake. And this situation happened in the 1900s around Lake Fundudzi. There was a group of 3 young women who went out to get some wood to cook at home. They walked into the sacred area where the Nechiaba people perform their own rituals, where the broader public is not simply allowed to easily enter. Back at home, everyone was frantic and worried as the woman did not return that same day. One day turned into 3 days. It was very stressful. How did 3 people just randomly disappear? When it was discovered that the women were trapped in the sacred section of the lake, they called on the Nechiaba clan to perform rituals to try and free these people. The women were freed, and when they asked, how did you cope? How did you manage in this area? You didn't have any food, you didn't have anything to survive. They recall being fed, and they didn't actually know where this food came from, but they couldn't remember anything else beyond this. Have you ever heard of a lake that arrests people? Have you ever heard of a lake that detains people? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, and if you've ever experienced something like this. Lake Fundudzi is so sacred, and it is filled with so much divinity. As I mentioned, you could just feel this humming and this presence beneath the surface. And before getting close to the waters of Lake Fundudzi, you couldn't just look at the lake directly, actually. You had to turn around and bend over, and this is viewed as a means of being able to be introduced to the lake. And that is sort of like the sacredness of the lake, sort of being introduced to it.
Chikoloni kana ngamgira sonda rakitwane pa Fundudzi pare zono phe ho akoteliwa ho itwa thongera tangana nazo hayi
Bona vana vamwe vakuzvita
atati babona khamuti ha babona babona neta babona ene ndo banga vakotofuriwa ngodwela zwethu uchifiwa tuwa waita ani awi nero ndala bathu vanja pa Fundudzi ndichibabonisa Fundudzi vapedza vati tuwa uchifiwa tu basakodorole. As
I reflect on this tradition where people are supposed to turn around and bend over to look at the lake, I sort of wonder why it's so widely spread. Even when you look at the literature that exists on this lake, the research that is out there on this lake, it reinforces the same misconception. But as you heard, this isn't really what happens or how people really live their day-to-day life. So I sort of wonder, why has this been distorted? Is it maybe researchers not fully understanding what people meant in terms of giving respect to the lake? Or maybe it's the other way around, people fearing that the lake wouldn't respect the due sacredness and appreciation unless people sort of had this high level of respect. Let me know what your thoughts are. Mystery 3. How come the crocodiles and the snakes of Lake Fundudzi don't bite people? As I mentioned, there is so much beauty and biodiversity that surrounds Lake Fundudzi. And there were so many different types of birds that I got to hear, so many bugs and insects, and also so many different types of plants. And there are also crocodiles and snakes, water snakes, that live within the lake. Yet in spite of all of this, they don't actually attack or bite the people there, which is so strange, such a mystery.
When zaone atifani na zamingwe milambo. When zaone atile bathu. Tsibengana na ngwa, mbya kana mbudzi. Arali na musi mbya iko chimbila bukati yabo. Ya idea. Wone muthu aina ndaba nawo rine ralo wari kibambela ne paka Fundudzi kidi bambela ngapa ngona iko thunwa ngapo rine chita chuniyo ne chibanga apa awona society yakari ndari bona chitola.
I'm being serious. There have been no attacks of the wildlife or the water snakes or the crocodiles biting or attacking the people here. That is such a mystery, and that is so odd, and perhaps leans into this thing where the people and the animals sort of live within this harmony and sort of have adapted and created this symbiotic relationship. This in itself adds to the mystery of the lake. If there are any biologists who are able to explain this, how wildlife and humans are able to coexist with each other, let me know in the comments and also explain why it could cause this. There are so many experiences just like this around the lake, Lake Fundudzi, and it sort of gives you a glimpse into how sacred this lake is and how deeply the lake is respected. And some things are so sacred that some people don't want to share these stories with the rest of the outside world because of the past that also exists. Oftentimes, government and people who meant harm to the indigenous community here would distort the experiences and the stories of the people who live here, and also how they've lived here for generations and centuries. This is rooted in how often people would get comfortable and would trust government and trust other third parties with their stories and their own experiences and their sacred knowledge, and how it was often distorted and misused and abused. And as a result, people are very wary and very cautious. Which brings me to my next mystery, mystery 4. What is the future for Lake Fundudzi? And also, I have a bonus mystery after this, so stay tuned. Lake Fundudzi is a lake that technically should not exist. So what does this mean for the future of Lake Fundudzi? Lake Fundudzi has repeatedly been under threat by external forces, from people trying to mine gold within the area to even further, people trying to take ownership of the lake. People tried to actually fence off the lake. What happened was that they tried to establish their fences, and the next morning when the people came back to look at their new owned lake, the fencing was destroyed. That was a mystery in itself. Maybe it was that the spirits of the lake were battling. I don't know. Let me know what your thoughts are. I saw this proposal for Lake Fundudzi to be listed as a National Heritage Site, and it has been so under SARA, South African Heritage Resource Agency. And, you know, things are nice. Things are very, very nice when the government of the day represents your interests and your values. However, South Africa is rapidly changing, and within itself, SARA is already resource-strapped, has a lot of limitations, and already struggling on their own. And also bear in mind, government in itself is already struggling and resource-strapped. What happens when other people don't see the sacredness of this lake and the intrinsic cultural practices that people practice here as valuable, but only see money and exploitation? Should a lake so sacred be under the control and also be managed by a government whereby oftentimes in the past, historically, amongst South African indigenous people, didn't respect land rights, didn't prioritize the interests and the customs and practices of indigenous South Africans? And somewhat now, could Fundudzi, Lake Fundudzi, also fall under that? I read this incredible article in the Limpopo Mirror where Vamusanda Rufuno Nechiava was speaking out against how, despite Lake Fundudzi being listed as a National Heritage Center, that there isn't much protection for it granted like Robben Island or granted like Mapungubwe, for instance, and that actually Fundudzi has been under threat from overfishing, from people abusing and misusing the land, from forest fires, and that in a sense that many people don't feel like Lake Fundudzi has been prioritized and even its legacy has been prioritized, where there is so much richness and so much to learn from Lake Fundudzi that it's somewhat been sidelined and ignored. I remember reading this news article on how environmental laws are currently existing, that it more so focuses on how the current environment is used. But the bigger question emerges is that how can we actually protect the environment itself? In North and South America, the indigenous people there have begun a new legal revolution where they have now given legal personality to nature, such as indigenous rice fields, rivers, and so much more. So think of it like this. In South Africa, we have our Bill of Rights. Those Bill of Rights could begin to apply to living natural resources such as Lake Fundudzi. So for example, within the Bill of Rights, we have the right to life. So if somebody is actually hurting or harming the lake, potentially poisoning it, or maybe starting forest fires, this means that people could actually be viewed to be limiting the right to life for this lake. And this is a legal framework that is already being used in North and South America, specifically in the USA and also in Canada, for instance.
But it's so thick, so stale. Water doesn't move through it. Like it sinks all the way to the bottom. So I wonder, like, how does this also affect the overall like fish in the sea, in the lake, and also the crocodiles, etc. How are they also impacted? It looks like there's oil in the water, like over there. Looks like oil that's built up. I'll show you some angles, some other angles also. But here is the lake in all its greatness. I am so close to it. Look at that, but it's raining. It's raining. It's been raining all over the place. And some birds, some plants that I'm seeing. Look at that.
Instead of going back in time where government has dictated a lot of how indigenous people connect and relate to their own relationships with nature, this is another alternative. Let the lake itself be protected and without having any government interference, without government dictating the relationship with nature. South Africa is a country of never ever again. Never going back to a system where the land rights of indigenous people were not protected. Never going back to a situation where indigenous people's practices and their own relationship to nature were not prioritized or cared for. Under this current framework, SARA is able to override the indigenous knowledge and indigenous systems of the community living there, of the indigenous and sacred knowledge that people have held for generations. On top of that, SARA boosts tourism. It's aimed at trying to get more people into the area. However, is this the best alternative? And through SARA, they're able to override the systems and the sacred knowledge that people have within the area and within the region. People that have known so much and sacred knowledge that has been held there for generations and legacies that still stand there. Right now, even within this article, there's been a crisis. There's been a crisis, for instance, with overfishing. When I spoke to members of the community, they spoke about how there's been this influx of illegal foreigners coming in and illegally fishing and further harming the community. And when I spoke to one of the indigenous members there, they spoke about how actually the fish size is actually also further decreased. It's not as big as it was before. And even further than that, when you have these tourists coming in, they don't really have necessarily a vested interest in the progression of the community as a whole. Imagine this. Somebody gets in their car, maybe they're driving from a different province, they get in their car, maybe they happen to have a virus on their shoe, or maybe happen to have a spore or a fungus on their shoe. They get in their car, they drive all the way to Lake Fundudzi. When they get out their car, they actually end up releasing a fungus or a parasite into the natural environment there. And there isn't enough protection of the natural environment and actually how it continues to also be protected, how it continues to grow. Nobody really cares about this environment, even from what was reported by other village members and community members there. So that being said, is an alternative future? Can Lake Fundudzi also begin to be an example, setting stone that begins to have its own legal personality and identity that has for so long been denied and ignored? And learning and taking a page out of other indigenous people from North and South America and countries such as the USA and in Canada, where nature is not just viewed as an accessory, but an integral part of the lives of people living within the area. So with this alternative model, a big question emerges. Can this fit within our constitutional framework? Because it does require voting within Parliament, a 2/3 majority, and that is a lot also to also sort of obtain. And that requires political will, also civil will to also get this to pass. Maybe there's another alternative in terms of being able to protect these sacred sites, because Lake Fundudzi is not the only one in South Africa. There are different communities and tribes here within South Africa that have their own connection to different aspects such as nature, and they all are also fighting their own battles, just like the people who live around Lake Fundudzi. So is there perhaps another path or another alternative to try and ensure that indigenous people and their sacred sites and their sacred connections to nature are protected? Let me know what your thoughts are. Our last mystery and our bonus mystery is the mystery of Chapiedzi. So according to villagers, there was a lot of heavy rain a couple of years ago, and this occasional island formed. You can see here in this video, there's a little island there that formed.
Kuwela kashango la chulungu pasi apala hafundisi apala unena kubonane pala rizungufuka hova una fetu we nguyumwe ina damu yada yadzula hone yambudzidzala henefo hava na ngunji happy Chapiedzi ngaedzi mku yoda utonga horali tiri ina damu hengu yodai huna damu ya dzula hapa ikidzula hapa Fundudzi lambudzidala latinga icho chikwara yambudzidzala nepo tsaba ngunji hafi Chapiedzi chakita fi Chapiedzi icho chikwarani cho Chapiedzi ngehembyu ya ne pala ene paka Fundudzi songofirani ene pala kepala.
She lambed, and when she lambed, nobody knew who the sheep belonged to, where it came from, and how it even arrived in the first place. But one day, the sheep and the ewes just vanished while there was still this occasional island. And that is somewhat how this little section of Lake Fundudzi got its name, Chapiedzi, which means the land of the ewes. And I think that's so beautiful and so interesting, sort of like reclamation and also carving out a new identity within this space and having a different sort of connection. A land where the impossible happened, and that sort of sea speaks to Lake Fundudzi. So yeah, let me know what your thoughts are, where you land with this. And I'd really like to give special thanks to the community members and village members that I spoke to, such as Vavenda, Alfred Buderi, and Simon Mgwabana, for instance. Really helpful people and also bring this together. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know, have you ever experienced something so strange and so weird like this? Do you maybe know something similar or a similar place just like this? And leave your thoughts in the comment section and enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you next time. Bye.